Hi, and welcome to the Real Squabble. Today, we're talking to Ellis Goldberg, Director of Ministry Partner Development with Crew. That's Campus Crusade for Christ. He's down in sunny Orlando, Florida. Dave's freezing in Idaho, and I'm kind of in the middle with a slight cold, as you can probably hear here in Annapolis, Maryland. He will share how he grew up Jewish, went to Hebrew school, and finally connected with Judaism and found the Messiah. We'll find out more coming up. Before we do, though, before we jump in, let me remind you to follow us on Facebook and subscribe to our YouTube channel, The Real Squabble. We're up to about 1,000 followers now, Dave. So just in a few short months, we appreciate your support. We appreciate you sharing that with folks. And we look forward to Dave guiding us through a conversation with Ellis Goldstein. Do you say Goldstein or Goldstein, Ellis?
I say Stein, even though my brother says Steen.
Okay, of course. There's got to be a family feud.
His brother's kind of weird.
Yeah. Well, everyone's got a weird brother. In my family, it's me. So what can I say? All right, Dave, go ahead and guide us into this.
Yeah, so I met Ellis, gosh, I guess 31 years ago now in 1993 when I had joined the staff of Campus Crusade. Back then, he was the director of Ministry Partner Development, which is their lingo for teaching people how to raise financial support to be missionaries with Campus Crusade. And over the course of the years, he and I just ended up striking up a friendship. I worked for him directly on a couple of different occasions when I was on staff with Crew. And so our friendship has just been very long lasting. I would say he's been one of my best friends and mentors for at least the last 20 years. And, together we've walked through some pretty difficult times in each other's lives. And as we've been talking these last couple of months about just issues related to the U.S. and Israel and politics and things like that, I thought it might be interesting to have a conversation with someone who is a Jewish believer. And so I would just start by inviting you, Ellis, to just kind of share a little bit about your time growing up in Philadelphia as a young Jewish boy in the mean streets of urban Philadelphia.
Well, if you're referring to the time when my elementary school sort of playground, when someone came after me with an ice pick. So if you're referring to that, the main streets of Philadelphia, actually, that was true.
That's a peaceful day.
That was a peaceful. No,
if I recall though, you had said something bad about Geno's, and so that was kind of brought on yourself.
My background was pretty typical. Growing up in a Jewish home, as most Jewish kids do, and our neighborhood was, significantly Jewish, and lived in the inner city in Philly. Although I did have some friends that were not Jewish, and I went to Hebrew school for about 8 years, which was something we did every day after school. Monday to Friday, and then Monday to Saturday, and then on Sundays. And and my parents were a conservative Jewish background, but yet, one of the things that that becomes apparent when you get to know Jewish people, there is being Jewish, which is the ethnicity, and then there's the Judaism, which would be the religious part. And my parents would only go to the synagogue probably twice a year for Rosh Hashanah or Yom Kippur. And when I went to Hebrew school, it was about learning Hebrew. People would always ask me, do I know Hebrew? And I think I learned Hebrew in the same way you learned Latin. Who speaks Latin? I didn't learn to speak it. I can still read it, but doesn't mean that I can understand it. But going to Hebrew school really became a focus of preparing for my bar mitzvah. A time when a Jewish boy, in a sense, takes his place within a Jewish community, but yet I didn't understand that. We're going through Hebrew school. Everything I was supposed to do to get ready for my bar mitzvah just memorized, and we were given from the cantor of the synagogue. We were given this. It was a vinyl record, which I guess today could bring in some good money. But it was the portion that I would need to sing or chant during the synagogue service. And it was, synagogue service. There's a portion that's read from 5 books of Moses, and second part from the Torah, or one of the other prophets. And yet, as I learned my part of what I was supposed to do, and how awful that is for a 13-year-old to sing in front of so many people when his voice is going to change. But I went through that, and while that's exciting in the life of the Jewish community and the family, I never understood what it was about. And went through that, continued to go to Hebrew school for a couple of more years. And then, like many Jewish kids, discontinued going to Hebrew school. What was important to me at that time was just finding something that would make me feel significant in life. And so I ran cross country, track and field, did those things, and became one of the leading distance runners in the high school, and placed and won some races over time. And yet, when I graduated from high school, and I went off to Penn State to major in architecture, where I got my degree in 5 years, which was normal at that time. It was a lonely experience. Across campus one day, and I guess it was my freshman year, where there was a poster, and so this was 1968 during this time, and there was a poster that it was a black and white poster, and it said "Wanted," and it had a picture of Jesus. Well, growing up in a Jewish home, I wanted nothing to do with Jesus at all. It was just sort of anathema. He was the one that persecuted. Through him, people persecuted and killed Jewish people. But what happened was, about a year later, there was a meeting on campus, and it was called. It was in my dormitory. It was called "How to Be a Christian Without Being Religious," and for some strange reason, I went down to that meeting for a study break. It was the oddest place for me to go and take a study break, and it made no sense why I went there. Today, I can say that God drew me there. I went to this meeting, and someone shared about what it meant to be a believer, what it meant to be a Christian, and I just was just arrogant and responded that people can get to God in their own way. And for the next 5 months, met off and on with one of the men on campus. And we would go over some things in the Old Testament, go through the parts of the scriptures that talked about the promised Messiah. And it meant nothing to me, because that was not something that I learned about. But 5 months later, there was another meeting on campus. About 100 students were there, and I was invited, and I went there. And during the first part of the meeting, it was very informal, where students were sharing one at a time about some things that about the relationship with the Lord, or what God was doing in their lives. And I don't remember much about what they said, but there was but one of the things that happened, which forever marked my life, and I call it like an Apostle Paul moment. Just as the Apostle Paul, as when Jesus got his attention very dramatically, and his life was forever changed as he came face to face with who became his Messiah, Jesus. And I had a moment like that, not like the Apostle Paul, but it was instantaneous, that all of a sudden I understood. I went from what I would call darkness till all of a sudden I understood Jesus was my promised Messiah, and I embraced him at that point. And so that was on March 3rd, 1970, that I made that commitment, and my life changed forever at that point.
What was key to helping you understand that?
What was key to helping me understand that? It was the reason I call it like an Apostle Paul like experience. It literally went from darkness to all of a sudden it made sense. It made sense that Jesus was the promised Messiah, that the prophecies of the Old Testament were about him. He was the promised one. And it just, all I can say, it was like a puzzle that all fell together, that all of a sudden I understood.
So Ellis, I'm struck by your statement that you had not really thought about Messiah at all, having grown up in Hebrew school. So
Right.
as you were going through the different festivals and celebrating Hanukkah every year and all these kinds of things, did or doing Passover seders and things, did Messiah, was Messiah just not talked about, or was it talked about in some sort of a distant mythological type way? Or talk about that for a minute.
It was, it's easy to answer, Dave. It was not talked about. There's no understanding of that. Not at all.
Can I ask you, Ellis? And I've only learned this in recent years, and I really can't define it, but I know that the Jewish have various denominations too. You said your parents were conservative, and you have Reformed Jews, and you have Orthodox Jews. Is that because of being conservative? Was that not an important issue for conservative Jews? Or is that something that's not talked about?
That is a fair question. In my religious education, my Jewish education that I had, it was not something that was talked about. When you and I talk about the Messiah, we talk about this. We talk about this incredible relationship we have with the Lord through Him, and that He's divine. That was not a part of conversation. It was nothing that we ever talked about. It was not even a thought.
Mm-hmm.
Not,
Right.
It's interesting.
Not in my synagogue, and not in the through Hebrew school.
It's interesting because I know among secular Jews in Israel today, through some common friends that you and I have, we've learned that Messiah has really been relegated to almost like a cultural myth, and I'm kind of struck. And as you know, and Mike knows, we're big fans of The Chosen in our family, and in watching these roundtable discussions where Dallas talks to his evangelical and Catholic and Messianic Jewish advisors, I'm really struck by the similarities between Catholicism and Judaism on certain levels. And what I thought was really fascinating about what you said about your parents growing up is they went to synagogue a couple of times a year, and that was about it. And it kind of struck me as parallel to a lot of Catholic or even evangelical families that, they would say being Christian is an important part of their life, but they go to church twice a year and don't really do anything else aside from that, but they talk about it. Would you say that is kind of similar to your upbringing in Judaism and Hebrew school, that you guys were kind of, as we say in Christianity, C&E Jews?
Well, it was. I would say somewhat. It was not something that we talked about at home. My parents didn't say, "What did you learn in Hebrew school today?" We never talked about those things, and so that's why I said before that what you have is that you have the ethnicity of the Jewish people that people strongly identify with, and some don't, but many do, most do. And then there is there's the faith side. And my experience with many conservative Jews is that, yes, you'll find that some are observant and will go to synagogue, but there is no understanding about the type of personal relationship that you can have with God. Even when in reading through the Old Testament and you see the connection like Abraham had with God, and that was a that was pretty personal when you take a look at that. And yet, in the Judaism I grew up in, that was not even a concept to talk about.
Mm-hmm.
That doesn't mean that others may not have, but not in what I grew up in.
Except, Dave, that would have been a C or an R and Y Jew, not a
right.
Okay.
R and Y, Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. There you go.
Do you consider yourself a Messianic Jew? Is that a correct?
Yes, I do. The term that has stuck with me the most, or the one that's been the most meaningful, was the person who helped me grow in my faith. One of the things that he did is that he helped reinforce that when I accepted Jesus as my Messiah, that did not mean that I would, that what it did, it deepened my faith. I consider myself a completed Jew, one who has come to believe in Jesus as his Messiah. And so I'm complete. So somebody who's listening, who's Jewish, may say, well, are you saying that I am not complete? And I would say, not until you meet Jesus as your Messiah.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Interesting. I'll jump in here. I've got a ton of questions myself, actually. But what do you think? What's the most important thing you think that other believers in Jesus as Savior are missing out by not embracing some of those Jewish origins? I've thought about that, about celebrating, certain things that I wasn't raised in celebrating, but I look at them now and I go out when they have the menorah lighting here, and I enjoy celebrating Hanukkah with some of the Jewish people in our town center.
No, that's an insightful question, Mike. I like it. The thing that came to mind, the first thing as you began to talk, was just about Passover. It's where we taught our daughter about something that is so important to Christians, believers, is communion. And yet the way that we teach communion, I think really leaves out, I mean, it touches on important points. I'm not saying that pastors don't do that, but without the context of it, of what took place as Jesus celebrated Passover, that was how we taught our daughter about communion, was through Passover. And when you go through a Passover Seder and get the context of what that what's, quote, the Last Supper was about and what took place. And so the Jewishness of Jesus is significant. And it's important for believers to understand that you cannot understand Jesus without understanding the Old Testament. And matter of fact, the feast, what's commonly called the feasts of Israel, the various celebrations of different particular days, including Passover, that I think almost every one has messianic significance. Like even at Passover, there's it's interesting. There's a chair that's supposed to be an empty chair that is set up at the Passover table, and it's empty. And at the end of the Passover celebration, the father goes to the door, the front door, and basically, open. The door's open, and you're waiting for Elijah to come. And what we know from the scriptures, Elijah was to announce the coming of the Messiah. So and so within the celebration, there is so much messianic significance that even our Jewish people don't understand what was taking place there. And so, and similar things could be said for some of the other Jewish holidays. And so that as we know about the significance of those holidays, it helps us understand, Jesus. What is significant is that the Old Testament and New Testament. The Old Testament was so full of it was a 365 Messianic prophecies predicting what would be like. You cannot look at the Old Testament without understanding that, or look at the New Testament without understanding that, how Jesus fulfilled the law. That is so significant. Just as made me think of something. I was just reading. I'm a friend with the organization Jews for Jesus. I have a deep respect for them, and one of the things they do during the Passover season is around the country is they'll go to different churches and they will put on it's very well done. It's just outstanding. They'll go through the Passover service and bring out the meaning and the Messianic meaning. And I would encourage the listeners to go to their website and to look for a Passover celebration to see if it might not be in the area. Like Dave, even near you in Boise, there's going to be one. I think it's March 17th, something like that. So
yeah, I've been to a couple of those over the years, and that is incredibly significant and deeply meaningful. And I think for a lot of Christians, that is one of the missing elements in the cake that prevents them from really having a deep understanding of much of their Christianity. It's been said that you talk about identifying yourself as a completed Jew, and I think that there's a very real sense in which Christianity is really just a furtherance or a completed step into Judaism. In fact, Jason Sobel, who's the Messianic rabbi that advises Dallas and the Chosen, talks about how really John the Baptist and Jesus weren't necessarily trying to start a new religion, but were just bringing about a renewal movement that was completing some things that have been talked about in the Old Testament. And then that led to the formation of Christianity, which, it escapes a lot of people's notice that from the very beginning, Christianity was sort of in two flavors. You had the Jewish church in Jerusalem and the Gentile church in Antioch in Syria. And so that kind of continues to this day in Messianic Judaism and then Gentile Christianity. So you briefly talked about at the beginning in our little humorous intro, being chased around the schoolyard by a kid with an ice pick. In the course of your time as a Jewish believer, would you say that you've ever been in a situation where you felt like you were treated badly or treated differently for your Jewish ethnicity? Aside from me picking on you for not eating BLTs.
I am fortunate that I have not experienced that. Whereas I know that that I've had known people that their non-Jewish friends would refer to them as a Christ killer, which was something that was taught within Catholicism, but I have never seen in my lifetime. I'm 73, but I have never seen in my lifetime what we are seeing right now. On the rise of anti-Semitism, we haven't seen anything like this, I don't think, since World War II.
I have been so alarmed by that. I'm surprised, I guess, to see that level of hatred around the world in the UN, in our major universities, in the mouth of people that I would have never expected it. But I guess given the history and the hatred, it's some of those folks are just waiting to come out of their dark holes.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely.
As a person who is, I have some Ashkenazi Jewish blood in me, and I felt, and I know sometimes our emotions can be misleading to us. But being in Israel, as I was with Christians United for Israel, I was over there for about 10 days, and I just felt such a connection there and at the Western Wall with some of the Jewish people. I felt a connection to God there. I think certainly we're all misled in some ways, and they definitely need the Messiah. But I felt such a sincerity of worship and felt greatly drawn to it. And even as a Christian person, it's difficult to explain.
Yeah, I was. My wife and I were in Israel September, first 11 days of our first 10 days of September, and I was so glad that we were able to be there before the war broke out. But yes,
are there any what do you think, back to some of the things that you've come to understand and celebrate and do, and you're in Orlando with Crew, right? And Crew stands for Campus Crusade for Christ.
The word crew actually doesn't mean anything. It was but yes, it's
symbolic of it.
It's the word that's been used to replace Campus Crusade for Christ. Yes.
Oh, okay. So I'm just wondering what glaring things, maybe in your own life, or things that you see, stand out to you as a Christian, as a person who grew up in a Jewish family and Hebrew school. Are there things that you see that maybe are taught in the everyday Protestant church? You say, whoa, hold on, you really do need to have a deeper Jewish understanding of this thing that's going on here. To understand the gospel, to understand who Jesus was or is.
Boy, I could answer that come at it from a number of different directions. One thing, I think that comes to mind is maybe it's our understand of what worship is, one of the things that I think is confusing, let's say, the Jewish people, is it's not wrong or different denominations, that each one is an expression of something. But I think that it is confusing to Jewish people, and they don't understand that, and I don't blame them. The first time I went to church, it was really different, and doesn't mean that different is wrong, but I think that what is confusing can be confusing the Jewish people. I would say that, let me put it this way. Just as early missionaries would go overseas, and they would bring their organ with them, a small organ, and was trying to duplicate what was the worship within the United States over to another country. And I think that one of the things that happens is that we confuse people with our style of worship and saying, well, this is what, and we will all be surprised when we get to heaven and find that worship perhaps looks a lot different than we're experiencing it every day. And I think that's what gets confusing, not only for Jewish people, but for others, that what is presented to them is more of the form instead of the character. I may be going in a different direction that you wanted to, but
no, please.
One of the things that was so significant for me, there was two things. When growing up in my faith, I I would consider that I became more Jewish after I became a believer, as I came to understand. But I had a group of friends who encouraged that.
Mhm.
Whereas I think that sometimes when people come from a different background and come in to our church doors, is you feel like set aside your background, set aside your there's some things they want you to set aside, and we want you to practice Christianity the way that we think it should be practiced. I'm not
Mhm.
talking about
Mhm.
the scriptures. It's. I think it confuses people, and I think this is why we have why we have different ethnic, denominations, because
Okay.
just not
The
comfortable.
the
And
cultural aspects
the cultural aspects. And for me, one of that was helpful was that my culture was encouraged instead of discouraged. And I think that what as believers, that what we need to do, that when we have people that are from different backgrounds and different cultures, there are things in their cultures which are not wrong, but our churches sometimes are just not very welcoming. And so, why is it that we'll have in some churches, find that there is, we have the Hispanic, it's a mostly white church, and then they'll also have a Hispanic church that meets later in the day, or it'll be the African American church. And it's not wrong for those. I mean, there's even Messianic congregations because they feel more comfortable where their culture is encouraged.
Okay. Now, one of the things that I'm very interested in, Ellis, is the engagement with our Jewish friends. I have lots of Jewish friends here where I live in Annapolis. In the name of learning and education and friendship, we've attended synagogue to go and to experience that, and to have conversations as much as we could with a rabbi for our own edification, and for parts of graduate work that my wife had participated in. And I'm also a novelist. I've written a book of fiction. I'm writing a second book of fiction now that is nearly complete, kind of based on my couple weeks in Israel, right? And within that, I want to fairly engage in dialogue with some of the people that I met there, right? In a fictional way, of course, but I don't want it to be one of those movies where I pull out, there's a track with 4 steps, right? And it's like, no, I have people are people, but most of my experiences have been with Ben Shapiro types, Dennis Prager types. They're brilliant people, and I can see the way God has blessed them with innovation and just the things that they do and the way that they think and the way they so cherish education. That is that thing that they can never be taken away, the rabbi, told us when we were there. So with all that being said, as laying some groundwork, what is the best way you have found, the way you were dealt with perhaps, and the way you deal with your friends and family who are Jewish? What do you think is the best relational way to develop and to grow into an opportunity to actually share Christ in a way that is not combative and actually allows them to listen instead of turning you off immediately?
And no, I think that's great. What comes to mind is a conversation I just had with a longtime friend and his wife about some neighbors of theirs that they have become very close to. My friends are not Jewish, but the neighbors are, and and I think that what they have done is marvelous. Is that they have become friends, and then now feel at the point. Now is the time that they want to engage further in the conversation and talked about, well, how do we go about doing that? I think a mistake that's made is, the term friendship evangelism.
Mm-hmm.
There is a good side of it, and there is a not good side of it. It's like it's friendship, but without ever talking about your faith. I would say that friendship without ever talking about your faith is not really friendship, because if this is something that has so changed our lives, and frankly, eternity depends on it, how can we ignore the conversation? But there'll be a point where we want to talk about it. But I think that as we have relationships with people, there are natural ways to talk about what is so important to us. But I also think that what's important is learning, is coming to an understanding of the people that you're talking to, and are there certain words or certain things that may not translate well, and how do we communicate? How do we communicate our faith in a way that will make sense to people? An easy way in building a relationship with a person, a friendship, and that one of the things that I've encouraged, that if there is a book that like there's a book that I read many years ago, and it was about a father whose daughter had become a believer in Jesus as her Messiah when she was at college, and he was going to set out to prove it was wrong, and in the process he came to know the Lord. But it was a great way to enter into a spiritual conversation with somebody. I did this with my mother, and I asked her to read the book. She did not come to faith, but it was a way that I was able to engage her somewhat in the conversation. And so I think it's one of the things I've shared with people over time is that there are some words that we as believers use that are important to us. We have to understand that they mean something else to other people. When I first became a believer, I can't tell you how long it took, but it probably took a while during that first year, that saying Jesus Christ was really difficult for me. Here I am, I embrace Jesus as my Messiah, but the word Christ had symbolized to me as a Jewish person. Well, what did it symbolize? Well, it symbolized persecution. It symbolized some of the things that have happened over the centuries, and that in the name of Christ, the Jews were killed. And so it took me a while to be able to get beyond what those words meant on one level, what they represented to me. And so I think that with friends and building relationships with people, there are some decent books that are out there to tell you how to share your faith with a Jewish person, but how to do it, and what words need to have some help in people understanding what they mean.
Yeah, it seems like I have to have that conversation with folks quite often about the, what Jesus taught versus the misapplication of what Jesus taught and the way people behave. It's like, well, the Crusades, well, this, and it's like, well, what did Jesus teach? You always have to go back to what did he teach? He didn't say that. He didn't say to do many of the atrocities that occurred, and the names and the way things were turned in the mouth of people like Hitler and Mussolini and those types of folks.
It's that even something on a little bit different scale, but the name of a church can be offensive to a person. I remember there's one church that great church, wonderful. I think people would feel comfortable in there, welcomed. But I think that for a Jewish person, it would be hard to go in there because of the name of the church. And so the churches that have changed their names and call them, such and such community, community church, I think they've done the right thing. People say, well, you're taking the name of Christ out of it. And I would tell them, no, you're not. No, they haven't. What they have done is they've opened the door so that people come in and hear about him. When I was growing up and going back to the name of Cru, how do you think my parents felt about their son joining the staff of Campus Crusade for Christ? 2 words in there that were just terrible for them. The word crusade. And so today you think about a Billy Graham crusade as a bunch of people getting together in a stadium, and that's wonderful. Well, in history, what does crusade mean? It means Jews were killed. It's we don't think about the words. Words matter. The name of your church matters. And so it's important that in our language that we learn that there's some words that perhaps are not helpful. And so what words can we use to help people understand, come to know the Lord?
Yeah, we want to be so, we want to be evangelical, but sometimes to the point of being like aggressively pedantic, right? So that we're like pressing on people because God told us to go do it. And it's like we're speaking to a people who are culturally significantly different, because I don't think Jews grow up with an evangelical mindset, do they? They don't grow up with that. So they're not going to be as all embracing as perhaps some of my, I have German blood in me and German friends. They are not all embracing. So, you have to once you become a friend, you are a friend. But you have to be able to, I think, step back and quite honestly, even in very brief conversations, mild conversations with some of my Jewish neighbors at times, they said, their family, they have Christians and Jews in their family. They're mixed. So you don't, you never heard of that before Fiddler on the Roof. No. So, but I would say, well, I said to one of the ladies, I said, well, Jesus was Jewish. And, her eyes kind of got big, but she just sort of blew it off. She was like, yes, but he was very busy.
What? I missed that.
He was very busy. And I was like, yeah, he was, we've got to go back to the message though, really. And I wish that, it's really my goal to learn more about the Messianic teachings of Isaiah and Daniel, and what was taught, because I think probably the Christian church is more ignorant of that than we would like to admit.
Yeah, I would definitely agree with that statement. I would say that a focus of my teaching and preaching in church the last several years has been trying to help Christians understand better the Jewish roots of their Christianity. It seems like so much of the time we read and study the Old Testament through New Testament lenses, as opposed to studying the New Testament through Old Testament lenses, which is much more appropriate. And so, as a result, we miss half of what's going on in the Old Testament because we're looking at it from the wrong perspective. And also missing the significance of many things we're doing in the New Testament because we've lost that anchor, both religiously and culturally.
And there's a friend of mine who's a seminary professor and is a Messianic rabbi, and he teaches a course on the Jewishness. I think he teaches a course on the Jewishness of the New Testament, and it's really just understanding that it's context is important. And a lot of times we don't realize that when we're talking to people, we're saying things that to them are it's out of context. It doesn't make sense to them. But also one other thing, that I don't want people to be afraid of talking to their Jewish friends about Jesus. And a lot of people just are like, what do I say? I think becoming a friend and simply sharing with people when you start talking to them and you're asking people, tell me your story, tell me about yourself, and then may I tell you my story. And you may not have all the words right, and that's fine, because God can do things even with our words that somebody may not understand in a person's heart. And that is what was so helpful for me. I had people who cared about me enough, and let me put it that way, they cared about me enough to want to talk to me about Jesus.
Yeah. Are you a curiosity to your Jewish friends?
I'm sure I was at the time. But I think that the fun thing is that it's some of the old friendships. One in particular that I still have that goes back to seventh grade, and I became a believer. When I became a believer afterwards, and our friendship continued. Beyond.
Well, that's wonderful.
So looking back now as a believer and looking back at your Jewish upbringing, is there anything about your Jewish upbringing culturally or in terms of celebrating holidays or anything like that you would say was better in your Jewish house than in your Christian house today?
Dave, that's a good question.
The food.
In my home, where I grew up, is that we knew we were Jewish. Excuse me, but the celebrating of our Jewishness and talking about it, it was something that it would only occur during whether it's Hanukkah, Yom Kippur, Rosh Hashanah, but didn't always show up at other times of the year. Now, but it was important to my parents. But but we didn't talk about it a whole lot. I mean, I would love to have had a conversation as I go back that we would have had a conversation as a family and saying, here's what Judaism means to us. And perhaps some families have, but ours did not talk about that.
Can you recommend any good introductory books or even intermediate or advanced books for people to explore more about the Jewish culture and that would help them engage better?
Well, here's the thought. I would encourage people to go to two places where they can find some material that would be helpful. One would be the Jews for Jesus website, and look for the various books that they have. Some are testimonies, some are of how do you talk with your Jewish friends. There's another one that I think is, I saw several books that were just on their website. And it was talking about the feasts of Israel, the holidays that are celebrated, the Messianic significance. And I think that would be helpful to read those and just have an understanding of that. It's also, it would be good to, people, questions I've had over the years that how do I talk to my Jewish friends? I would feel comfortable, sending them, some of the material that you'd find either another organization called Chosen People Ministries or Jews for Jesus, their websites, and look for materials there that are on how to engage in a conversation with your Jewish friends and talk to them about the Word.
Very good.
But one other thing too, I think I think Dave was sort of getting at this before. I think, even picking up one of the books on the Feast of Israel, which I saw on the Jews for Jesus website, and understanding the significance of those holidays. Many Jewish people, they'll know some things about those holidays, but they will not understand the messianic significance of those. And I think there's a lot that can be picked up from that, which I think, frankly, I think Christians need to understand their Jewish roots. I think that's real important. I think I think that when we only understand Christianity from the New Testament on, we have missed that. We only know part of the story.
Right.
It's important to know the Jewish roots, and that it is that because when Jesus completed the law and fulfilled the law, it didn't mean the end of the Old Testament.
Right.
It was a fulfillment of it, but it's important to understand those the Jewish roots that are there. I think it enhances our own faith.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, two interesting things that come to mind in that regard. You know, in John 1, in his creation account, he talks about the Word becoming flesh and dwelling among us, and the word that is used in the Greek really means to tabernacle among us, and is really hearkening back to the Feast of Booths, the Feast of Tabernacles, and this idea of sojourning and spending a brief time for a specific purpose, and really sharing in our suffering in a lot of ways, because that's what Sukkot was about, is remembering the time of wandering and suffering. And then Hebrews ties that up in a big bow where it talks about Jesus came and suffered every way that we would, because he lived in a tabernacle with us. But then you think about, too, the baptism of Jesus, which I find that most people just kind of read the story of Jesus insisting that John baptize him, and they just kind of shrug their shoulders and move on and say, okay, we're supposed to get baptized, and completely miss the significance of the fact that John came in the spirit of Elijah, and Jesus, as his successor, came in the spirit of Elisha. And therefore, just as Elijah had to call Elisha, then therefore John had to call Jesus. And that's the whole point of, so that all righteousness may be fulfilled. But by not looking back at the Jewish aspect of the story, they miss the significance there. It's not just, well, Jesus got baptized, so we need to get baptized. This is John providing the messianic bona fides ministry by baptizing him in the spirit of Elijah, and then Jesus moving forward in the spirit of Elisha. And so, and people, a lot of people look at those things and kind of shrug their shoulders, being insignificant details, and yet those are some of the very things that anchor Jesus's ministry and the history of the prophecies that foretold his coming.
Mm-hmm. Okay, well, I guess we're getting toward the end here, so maybe you'd like to also tell us a little bit about what it is that you do with Cru.
What is it that I do? My first 8 years with Cru, I was involved in our campus work of reaching students for the Lord, and there was after the 8 years, I was asked to move into our New England main office, where I had a responsibility of overseeing some things with our staff. And one of those things that I became involved in was helping our staff, that all of our staff are responsible, our missionary staff are responsible for raising their financial support. And that was something that I loved doing and helping our staff. 10 years after doing that, I was asked to become the national director for what we call ministry partner development, and where over the years I was responsible for training our staff members, and I also consulted with other mission organizations, and probably during the time that I did that, probably had the privilege of training about 14,000 missionaries how to raise their support. For many missionaries, that ends up being one of the most difficult things. If you say, we're going to send you to a closed country in the Middle East, and they'll say, great. If we say, we want you to raise your support, they're going to say, whoa, wait a minute. That for many missionaries, using the term, it puts the fear of the Lord in them, is that it scares them to death to ask people to support them. And so I spent years with working with our missionaries and others outside of our organization, helping them understand that when we're raising support, I said several things happen. I said one is that we cannot approach raising support, asking people to support us, and have the attitude. We cannot say that if we can say that we're willing to go to the ends of the earth, but we are not willing to trust God to provide for us. Asking God to provide for us is not harder than reaching a closed country for Jesus. And yet in a person's mind, there's a battle going on, and it's not something they want to do. They think that when they're asking people to support them, it's doing something to people instead of asking people. The way that I think is the biblical way to look at it is that we're inviting people to be involved with what is on God's heart. And the way that we ask you to be involved is through praying for us, which is so significant, and giving so that you can be a part of our ministry. And so one of the things that I did is I changed what we call raising support, and I called it ministry partner development, which became a term that a lot of other mission organizations adopted in some form, because I view that these are the people that are giving for our ministry and praying for us. They are truly our partners. Missionaries will say, I can't do my job without you. And then I'll say to some missionaries, do you really mean that? Do you really believe that you can't do your job with them, without them? And we can't. Is that we have to have partners in what we do. We're just not looking for people to give. We want, there's, one of my ministry partners said to me one time, and he said when he supports our ministry, he feels like he has his hands all over it. I love that expression, that he feels like he has ownership within our ministry, which is what I want him to have. A friend of mine came up with an illustration, which I really loved. And I know nothing about boats. This is going to be it's about a boat, but I know nothing about boats, so I have to. So I may not get all the terms right. And so that boats that have a mast, that if that mast was not firmly anchored to the hull of that boat, it would just fall down. But it needs, so that mast that holds the sails, and so that when the wind blows in those sails, it moves that boat. And there is a name for the mechanism that holds the mast into the hull, and it's called a mast partner. And so I view the people that support our ministry is like a mast partner. They are anchored with us. We cannot do what we do without them. I've had people that have been supporting my ministry. This is my 51st year with Crew, and they've been giving for all 51 years. Some have gone to be with the Lord, and there's others that have come along, but they are a part of what I do. And that's what I want our staff to understand, that when they're raising support, this is about the relationship with the Lord. It is trusting God to do what only He can do. It's not about just raising money. It's about trusting God to do it. And God said that He would provide for you. Are you willing to put a stake in the ground and to say, I'm going to trust you for it? But in some ways, that is no different from the way we all need to live as believers. That we're willing to trust God to take care of us. And when we say that, yeah, I trust Him, are you going to put a stake in the ground and say, okay, I trust the Lord to do this?
How can folks get in contact with you?
Say that again?
How can folks get in contact with you?
Oh, they can get in contact with me through my email address at at ellis.goldstein@cru.org.
Okay. Any last words, Dave?
No, it's just been a lot of fun chatting with my longtime friend and mentor. Ellis and I have been there for each other and with each other in really good times and really ucky times. And it's just been a joy to see how God has grown our friendship over the decades. And
Amen.
Yeah.
That's wonderful. Thank you so much for your time, Ellis. We appreciate that. That's going to wrap up the Real Squabble with Ellis Goldstein, Director of Ministry Partner Development for Cru. I highly encourage you to visit his website. Write down the email, the address that he gave on this, and I put it below so folks can find it more easily. Considering watch this interview over and over and others that we post on the Real Squabble. Thanks for joining us.